They say money makes the world go round. But what if the money that runs the world isn't really money at all? Because the US dollar, the green paper printed by one nation, somehow became the weapon that controls global trade, shapes wars, and decides who prospers. By 1944, as the war was ending, representatives from 44 nations gathered in a small town called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission: to rebuild the global financial system. The deal they made changed everything. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the US dollar would become the world's anchor. Other currencies would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar in turn would be tied to gold. At that moment, the dollar wasn't just America's currency anymore. It became the world's reserve currency, a quiet shift from gold-backed money to trust-backed power. For the next 25 years, the system worked. Almost too well. The US printed dollars. The rest of the world accepted them. And gold sat in Fort Knox as the ultimate promise of value. But behind the scenes, a problem was growing. America was spending more, far more than it earned. Wars in Korea and Vietnam, global aid programs, and corporate expansion meant billions of dollars were leaving the US while the gold stayed the same. Other nations started asking questions. If these dollars are backed by gold, they said, can we exchange them? Countries like France, under President Charles de Gaulle, began demanding gold in return for their US dollars. The US Treasury panicked. There simply wasn't enough gold to match all the printed dollars. And then, in 1971, President Richard Nixon made a historic announcement, a moment that would redefine global money forever. He said the US would temporarily suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold, temporarily, turned permanent. From that moment, the dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by nothing but trust. The gold standard was gone. In the era of fiat currency, money created from thin air had begun. But how do you make the world trust paper that's worth whatever you say it is? Simple. Tie it to something everyone needs. In 1973, amid an oil crisis, US officials made a secretive deal with Saudi Arabia. The arrangement was elegant and brilliant. Every barrel of oil sold worldwide would be priced in US dollars. In return, US would protect Saudi oil fields and provide military support. Soon, every oil-producing nation followed. From that point on, if you wanted oil, you needed dollars. To get dollars, you had to trade with or borrow from the United States. That system became known as the Petrodollar. The world didn't just use the dollar anymore, it depended on it. The dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore, it was backed by oil, debt, and global demand. Over the decades, America discovered a new kind of power, one that didn't require bullets or bombs. By controlling the world's financial arteries from SWIFT, banking systems to IMF loans, the US could reward allies and punish enemies without ever firing a shot. When a country defied US interests, sanctions followed. And sanctions meant being cut off from dollars, from trade, banking, and survival. The dollar became a silent weapon, invisible but devastating. Countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia learned this the hard way. But even allies began to see the danger. Because whoever controls the dollar controls the world's economy. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, could print more money anytime it wanted, fueling wars, bailouts, and corporate rescues. The rest of the world holding dollar debt paid the price through inflation and devaluation. In short, the dollar's dominance became a global tax, one paid by every other nation on Earth. For decades, the system looked unshakable. But history has a way of repeating itself, and trust has a way of breaking. In 2008, the global financial crisis exposed the dark side of the dollar empire. Banks collapsed, trillions in fake credit vanished, and yet the dollar rose. It was a paradox. The very currency that caused the crisis became the world's safe haven. Why? Because no other system existed to replace it. But that might be changing. Nations like China, Russia, and India have begun trading in their own currencies. New alliances like BRICS are exploring gold-backed or digital alternatives. For the first time in nearly a century, the world is asking, is it time to end the dollar's rule? At the same time, digital currencies, both decentralized like Bitcoin and state-controlled like CBDCs, threaten to redefine what money even means. The question now isn't whether the dollar can survive. It's whether the world still wants it to. Look closely, and you'll see a pattern. Every empire in history, Rome, Spain, Britain, built its power on currency control. They issued coins or notes trusted across continents. They funded wars and expansion with borrowed money. And when the world lost faith, the empire fell. Today, the US faces the same cycle. Massive national debt, now over $35 trillion. Endless money printing. Over 40% of all US dollars in existence were created after 2020. And rising nations creating parallel systems to bypass American control. It's the same formula, repeating a warning written in economic history. The dollar gave the US more power than any empire before it, but power once stretched too far eventually snaps. So what can we learn from this story? Takeaway 1. Money is never neutral. Behind every currency is a system of power, influence, and control. The dollar isn't just paper, it's a weapon built on global dependence. Takeaway 2. Trust is the real currency. Gold, oil, or crypto. None matter if people stop believing in the system that backs them. The dollar's strength is psychological, until it's not. Takeaway 3. Every empire's money becomes its weakness. When spending, debt, and printing spiral beyond control, collapse follows. Not overnight, but inevitably. As you watch this, the world is quietly rearranging its financial map. It's the same way it did in 1944 and again in 1971. If history is any guide, the next Shift 1T just change how we buy or sell. It will change who holds power. The dollar has been the world's greatest illusion, a promise of stability built on invisible strings of trust, oil, and control. But illusions, no matter how strong, eventually fade.